A cleaning lady opens a locked room, and what she sees makes her cry. Maria Santos had been cleaning houses in Sydney's eastern suburbs for 23 years. She'd seen it all: hoarders, mansions with more rooms than occupants, homes so pristine they looked like museums. But nothing had prepared her for what she'd find at 47 Bellevue Street, Double Bay. The house belonged to Richard Ashworth, a corporate lawyer who travelled constantly for work. He'd hired Maria through an agency 3 months ago to come twice weekly, Tuesdays and Fridays, to keep the place tidy. It was a massive Federation-style home, 5 bedrooms, worth millions, but Richard lived there alone. No family, few visitors, just a man married to his career. Maria had found him cold from the start. He never made eye contact, left instructions on printed notes rather than speaking to her, and made it clear she was to clean specific areas only: the lounge, kitchen, bathrooms, his bedroom, and the guest rooms. That was it. The study was off limits, and the room at the end of the upstairs hallway, the one with the deadbolt lock, was absolutely forbidden. "Don't even think about that room," he'd told her on her first day, his voice sharp. "It's private. Personal items. You go near it, you're sacked. Understood?" Maria had nodded, intimidated by his tone. She needed this job. At 56, with her husband Carlos recovering from a stroke and medical bills piling up, she couldn't afford to lose steady work. So she'd obeyed, cleaning around the locked room, never asking questions. But on this particular Friday in late autumn, Richard Ashworth had left in a hurry. Maria arrived to find a note on the kitchen bench saying he'd been called to Melbourne unexpectedly, would be gone for 3 days, and she should do a deep clean of the main areas. Nothing about the locked room, but something else caught her attention. Sitting on the bench beside the note was a key ring. Not Richard's usual car keys, but a smaller ring with just 2 keys. One looked like it fit the study, the other. Maria stared at the second key, her heart beating faster. It could fit the locked room. Richard had obviously forgotten it in his rush to leave. She should ignore it, do her job, pretend she hadn't seen it. But as she started cleaning the kitchen, Maria became aware of a sound she'd never noticed before. Maybe because Richard was always home, creating ambient noise, phone calls, television, footsteps. Now, in the silent house, she could hear something coming from upstairs, scratching, faint but persistent, and was that whimpering? Maria paused, mop in hand, listening. Yes, definitely whimpering, like an animal in distress. Her mind raced. Did Richard have a pet? She'd never seen evidence. No food bowls, no toys, no smell. But that sound was unmistakable. Something was alive behind that locked door. Maria told herself to mind her business. This was Richard's house, Richard's private space. Whatever was in there was none of her concern. She went back to mopping, but the whimpering continued, growing more desperate. By lunchtime, Maria couldn't ignore it anymore. What if it was an animal that needed help? What if Richard had forgotten to arrange care before leaving? What if something was dying in there? Her hands shook as she picked up the key ring. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling like a betrayal of trust, but also like the only decent thing to do. The scratching intensified as she approached the door, and now she could hear something else, a chain rattling. "Jesus, Mary and Joseph," she whispered, her Portuguese accent thickening with stress. Maria stood in front of the locked door, key in hand, heart pounding. She could still walk away, could put the keys back, finish her work, pretend she'd heard nothing. In 3 days, Richard would return, and she'd never know what was behind this door. But the whimpering came again, weaker this time, and Maria thought of her own dog back in Brazil, the one she'd had as a child. Thought of how helpless animals were, how dependent on humans who sometimes failed them. She slid the key into the lock. It turned smoothly. The deadbolt clicked open. Maria pushed the door open and the smell hit her first. Urine, feces, unwashed bodies, decay. She gagged, covering her nose with her sleeve. The room was dark, curtains drawn, but enough light spilled in from the hallway to see 3 dogs, all chained to bolts in the floor. The chains were heavy, industrial, giving them just enough room to lie down but not move freely. 2 were cream-colored, maybe Labradors or mixes. The third was smaller, some kind of terrier. All 3 were horrifically thin, their ribs showing through matted, filthy coats. Their water bowls were empty. The food bowls contained what looked like moldy scraps. The smaller dog was lying completely still. For a terrible moment, Maria thought it was dead. Then she saw its chest rise and fall. Barely. The sight of those 3 dogs, neglected, abused, suffering in silence in this $1,000,000 home, broke something in Maria. Tears streamed down her face as she stepped into the room. "Oh God, oh my God, what has he done to you?" One of the Labradors lifted its head, looking at her with eyes so sad and hopeless that Maria felt physical pain in her chest. The dog made no sound, as if it had learned that crying brought no help. Maria pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She needed to call someone, the police, the RSPCA, someone who could help. But as she started to dial, she heard something that made her blood run cold. A car door slamming. In the driveway, Maria rushed to the window and looked down. Richard Ashworth's black Mercedes was parked in the drive. He was back, 3 days early, and she was standing in the forbidden room with his terrible secret exposed. Maria's mind raced. She had seconds to decide. Run downstairs and pretend she hadn't been in the room. Impossible. Richard would see the open door. Confront him. She was a 56-year-old cleaning lady facing a wealthy, powerful man who was clearly capable of terrible cruelty. But as she looked at the 3 suffering dogs, Maria knew she couldn't run. Wouldn't run. Not this time. She'd spent 23 years cleaning up other people's messes, staying silent, staying invisible. These dogs had no voice. Someone had to speak for them. She heard the front door open, heard Richard's footsteps on the marble floor below. "Maria, you here?" His voice was casual, unsuspecting. Maria took a deep breath, wiped her tears, and stepped out of the room, leaving the door open. She walked to the top of the stairs. "I'm here, Mr. Ashworth." Richard appeared at the bottom of the staircase, briefcase in hand, loosening his tie. He looked up and saw her standing there, and something in her expression must have alerted him because his face changed. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I opened the room, the locked room. The words hung in the air. Richard's face went through several expressions: shock, anger, calculation. Then it settled into cold fury. "I told you that room was off limits. You had no right—" "There are dogs in there," Maria's voice cracked. 3 dogs, chained up, starving. How could you?" Richard started climbing the stairs, his face darkening. "You need to leave. Now. You're sacked. Get out of my house before I call the police." "The police?" Maria felt something snap inside her. "Yes, call them. Call them right now so they can see what you've done." Richard stopped halfway up the stairs. For the first time since Maria had known him, he looked uncertain. "You don't understand. Those dogs are dangerous. They attacked someone. I'm keeping them contained until I can arrange proper disposal." "Disposal? They're not rubbish. They're living creatures. And they don't look dangerous. They look terrified." Maria pulled out her phone, and Richard lunged up the remaining stairs, reaching for it. "Don't you dare! Give me that phone!" Maria stepped back, holding the phone against her chest. "I've already taken photos. I've already sent them to my daughter. If you touch me, if anything happens to me, she knows where I am and what I've found." It was a bluff. She hadn't had time to send anything, but Richard didn't know that. He stopped, breathing hard, his lawyer's mind clearly working through the implications. "Maria, let's be reasonable. You need this job, right? Your husband's medical bills? I know about that. What if I doubled your pay, triple it? Just walk away from this. Those dogs are my property. What I do with them is my business." The offer was tempting. God, it was tempting. Triple pay would solve so many problems. But Maria looked past Richard to the open door of that room, thought of those 3 pairs of desperate eyes. "No, I'm calling the RSPCA. Right now. You do that and I'll sue you. Breaking and entering, theft. I'll destroy you. Then destroy me. I don't care." And the truth was, she didn't. Some things were more important than money, than security, than staying invisible. Maria dialed the RSPCA emergency line, her hands steady now despite Richard's threats. The operator answered, and Maria explained the situation in rapid English, her accent thick with emotion. She gave the address, described the condition of the dogs. Richard stood there, his face a mask of rage, but he didn't try to stop her. He was smart enough to know that would only make things worse. "They're sending someone immediately." The operator's voice was kind. "You did the right thing calling. Stay on the line until they arrive." Maria stayed on the phone, standing guard at the top of the stairs, while Richard paced below, making his own calls to his lawyer from the sound of it. 20 minutes later, an RSPCA van pulled up outside, followed by a police car. Maria let them in. The RSPCA inspector, a woman named Sarah Mitchell, took one look at Maria's tear-stained face and touched her arm gently. "Show me." They went upstairs, and Sarah entered the locked room. Maria watched the inspector's face harden as she took in the scene. The police constable, a young man who looked fresh out of training, actually turned away, looking ill. Jesus Christ! How long have they been like this? "I don't know. I just found them today. But months, maybe. I've been cleaning this house for 3 months, and that room was always locked." Sarah was already on her radio, calling for backup, for a vet, for animal transport. She knelt beside the smallest dog, the terrier, and gently touched its head. The dog's tail twitched slightly, not a wag, but a sign of life. "You're going to be okay now, all of you. I promise." Richard tried to spin a story to the police. The dogs had been strays he'd taken in. He'd been trying to find a rescue. He'd been too busy with work to provide proper care. But the evidence was damning. The heavy chains, the moldy food, the empty water bowls, the sheer neglect. The police constable cautioned Richard, told him he'd be charged with animal cruelty. Richard's face went white. "This is absurd. They're just dogs. I'll pay a fine, whatever, but I'm not a criminal." "You are now, mate." The constable's voice was cold. "And between you and me, I hope they throw the book at you." It took 2 hours for the RSPCA team to safely remove the dogs. They were so weak that lifting them onto stretchers required extreme care. The vet who arrived on scene started IV fluids immediately, her face grim as she examined each animal. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, infections, psychological trauma. The smallest one might not make it through the night, but we'll do everything we can. Maria watched them carry the dogs out, wrapped in blankets, heading to emergency veterinary care. She was still crying, couldn't seem to stop. Sarah Mitchell came back upstairs after seeing the dogs loaded. "You saved their lives. You know that, right? Another week, maybe 2, and they'd all have been dead. I should have opened that door sooner. Should have trusted my instincts. You opened it when it mattered. That's what counts." After everyone left, Maria gathered her cleaning supplies. Richard had disappeared into his study, no doubt calling expensive lawyers to minimize the damage to his reputation. Maria didn't care. She walked to the study door and knocked. "Come in." Richard looked up from his desk, his expression weary. "I'm leaving now, and I won't be coming back." Richard didn't look up from his papers. "Obviously, you're fired." "I quit. There's a difference." Maria turned to leave, then paused. "Those dogs have names, you know, or they should. They're not just property. They're lives you almost destroyed. Get out, Maria." She did. But as she drove home to her small apartment in Maroubra, Maria couldn't stop thinking about those 3 dogs. She'd done the right thing, she knew that. But would it be enough? Would they survive? Would they ever recover from what had been done to them? That night, Maria couldn't sleep. She kept seeing those hollow eyes, those emaciated bodies. At 2 in the morning, she finally got up and sent an email to Sarah Mitchell asking for updates. She didn't expect a response, but it made her feel slightly better to know she'd tried. The next morning, her phone rang. It was Sarah. "Maria, I wanted to give you an update. The dogs made it through the night, all 3 of them." Maria burst into tears of relief. Thank God, thank God. They're not out of danger yet, but they're fighters. The vet thinks with proper care, they'll all pull through. Which brings me to why I'm calling. The dogs are going to need extensive rehabilitation, physical and psychological. When they're ready, they'll need foster homes. I was wondering if you'd be interested. Maria's heart leapt, then sank. I would love that. But I live in a small apartment. My husband is recovering from a stroke, and we have our own dog already. I don't think I could manage 3 more. Not all 3. Just 1. We'll find separate placements. They've been through trauma together, but separation might actually help them heal individually, learn to trust humans again. And Maria, they know you. You were the first kind face they saw. That matters. Maria thought about Carlos, about their tiny apartment, about the financial strain. But she also thought about those dogs, about the smallest one who'd been so close to death. The little one, the terrier. If she survives, I'll take her. I'll find a way to make it work. Her name's Pip. At least, that's what we're calling her. We found a collar in the room, old and half buried in the filth, had a name tag. Pip. So they'd had names once, had been loved once, perhaps, before ending up in Richard Ashworth's House of Horrors. Maria wondered what had happened, how they'd gone from pets with names to prisoners in chains. Over the next 2 weeks, Maria called the RSPCA daily for updates. Pip was improving slowly. The 2 larger dogs, Max and Bella, according to old microchip registrations, were recovering faster, putting on weight, beginning to show interest in their surroundings. All 3 had severe trust issues with men, which wasn't surprising given Richard's treatment. The story had made the news. Local media picked it up. Eastern Suburbs lawyer, charged with animal cruelty. Richard's face was plastered across papers and news websites. His law firm put him on indefinite leave. Maria found herself briefly famous as the cleaning lady who saved 3 dogs, though she refused most interview requests. But one she accepted, from a journalist at the Sydney Morning Herald who wanted to write an in-depth piece about animal abuse in affluent areas, about how wealth could hide terrible secrets. People think animal cruelty only happens in poor areas, the journalist said during their interview. But abuse doesn't discriminate by postcode. Sometimes the biggest monsters live in the nicest houses. The article ran with photos of Pip, Max and Bella in their recovery, still thin but alert, their eyes beginning to show life again. The response was overwhelming. Donations flooded into the RSPCA. Offers to foster and adopt came from across Sydney. 3 weeks after the rescue, Sarah called again. Pip's ready. She's still fragile, still scared, but she needs to leave the clinical environment. She needs a home. Are you still willing? Yes, absolutely yes. Carlos had been skeptical at first when Maria told him about fostering Pip. They already had Bruno, their elderly Maltese, and space was tight. But when Maria showed him photos of Pip, the before and after, the tiny terrier who'd survived against all odds, his expression softened. She needs us. We'll manage. The day Maria brought Pip home was both joyful and heartbreaking. The little dog weighed barely 4 kilos, still underweight despite weeks of careful feeding. Her cream-colored coat was growing back, but patches remained where infections had caused hair loss. She trembled constantly, flinching at sudden movements. Bruno, their Maltese, approached Pip curiously. Pip cowered, pressing herself against Maria's legs, but Bruno just sniffed her gently and walked away, as if understanding this new dog needed space. "It's okay, sweetheart. Nobody's going to hurt you here, I promise." Those first few days were challenging. Pip wouldn't eat unless Maria hand-fed her. She wouldn't walk into rooms with Carlos, only slowly approaching him when he sat very still and spoke softly. She had accidents constantly, clearly never having been properly house-trained or too traumatized to remember. But slowly, gradually, Pip began to emerge from her shell. The breakthrough came one morning when Maria was crying over medical bills she couldn't pay. Carlos's medication was expensive, and fostering Pip had added costs despite RSPCA support. Pip, who usually kept her distance, walked over and put her small paw on Maria's leg. Maria looked down at the little terrier, and Pip looked back with eyes that understood suffering, that recognized a fellow survivor. Maria picked her up, Pip's first time allowing this, and the dog curled into her lap and stayed there. "You've been through hell too, haven't you? But we're both still here. We're both still fighting." 6 weeks after the rescue, Maria attended Richard Ashworth's court hearing. He'd pleaded guilty to 3 counts of animal cruelty, hoping for leniency. His lawyer argued that Richard had been under extreme work stress, that he'd made poor decisions but wasn't a bad person. Maria sat in the gallery, arms crossed, face set. When asked if she wanted to give a victim impact statement on behalf of the dogs, she stood, "I'm nobody important, just a cleaning lady. Richard Ashworth is rich, educated, powerful." But that day, in that room, I saw who we really were. He was someone who could torture helpless creatures and sleep at night. I was someone who couldn't stay silent. Those dogs couldn't speak for themselves. They couldn't leave. They couldn't ask for help. They depended on humans to show mercy, and he showed them cruelty. I hope you remember that when you pass sentence. Power and money don't make you a good person. How you treat the powerless does. The magistrate sentenced Richard to 12 months in prison, with 6 months suspended, plus a lifetime ban on owning animals and a $10,000 fine split between the RSPCA and a victim compensation fund. It wasn't enough. Maria would have preferred years, but it was something, and Richard's reputation was destroyed, his career likely over. Outside the courthouse, Sarah Mitchell hugged Maria. "You did it. You gave them justice. They gave me something too. Purpose. Courage. I spent so long being invisible, afraid to make waves. They taught me that sometimes you have to fight, even when you're scared." 4 months after the rescue, Maria received a message through the RSPCA. Max and Bella, the 2 Labradors, had been adopted together by a family in the Blue Mountains, with acreage and experience with traumatized dogs. They were thriving, learning to play again, beginning to trust. The family sent photos. Max and Bella running through long grass, tongues lolling, looking almost normal, almost happy. Maria cried when she saw them, grateful that their story had a happy chapter. Pip's recovery was slower but steady. She'd gained 3 kilos, her coat had fully grown back, and she no longer flinched at every sudden movement. Carlos had become her second favorite person, and she'd even started playing with Bruno, tentative at first, but gradually more confident. But the psychological scars remained. Pip still wouldn't go into closed rooms willingly, still panicked if she heard chains rattling, still had nightmares that left her whimpering in her sleep until Maria soothed her. "Some wounds take longer to heal," the RSPCA behaviorist told Maria during a check-in. "Pip may never be a normal dog, but she can still have a good life, a happy life. She just needs patience and love." Maria had both in abundance. She'd quit cleaning houses after the Ashworth case, unable to enter strangers' homes without wondering what secrets they hid. Instead, she'd started volunteering at the RSPCA shelter 3 days a week, helping socialize rescued animals, sharing Pip's story with potential adopters who were nervous about taking on damaged dogs. "They're not damaged," Maria would say. "They're survivors. There's a difference." The compensation fund from Richard's fine had helped with Carlos's medical bills. More importantly, the media attention on Maria's story had led to a fundraising campaign that anonymous donors had contributed to, raising enough to cover Carlos's treatment for the next year. Maria had been overwhelmed by the generosity of strangers moved by 3 abused dogs and 1 cleaning lady's courage. 6 months after the rescue, on a sunny spring morning, Maria took Pip to Centennial Park. It was Pip's first time in a large open space since the rescue, and Maria was nervous about how she'd react. But Pip surprised her. The little terrier, seeing the vast expanse of grass, the other dogs playing in the distance, stood very still. Her tail, which had only recently started wagging again, began to move. Then slowly at first, Pip started to run. Not fleeing, not panicking, just running for the joy of it, the freedom of it, running because she could, because no chain held her back, because the world was open and she was alive. Maria watched through tears as Pip ran in circles, rolled in the grass, barked at birds. A woman walking past stopped and smiled. "Beautiful dog. What breed?" "Survivor breed," Maria said. "The strongest breed there is." That evening, Maria received an unexpected phone call. It was from a television production company. They wanted to make a documentary about animal rescue, featuring Maria and Pip's story. Maria's first instinct was to say no. She'd had enough media attention, but the producer explained they wanted to focus on the broader issue of animal cruelty, on the people who fight against it, on the resilience of animals who survive. "Your story isn't just about you and Pip. It's about all the animals suffering in silence and all the people who could speak up but don't. We want to change that. Help us." Maria agreed, with one condition. Any fees she received would go directly to the RSPCA. The documentary, filmed over 2 months, including interviews with Sarah Mitchell, the vet who treated the dogs, and even footage of Max and Bella in their new home. The hardest part was returning to 47 Bellevue Street. The house had been sold after Richard's conviction. He needed money for legal fees and restitution. The new owners, a young family with 2 children, had heard the story and invited the documentary crew to film in the infamous locked room. It had been completely renovated, painted bright yellow, filled with toys and books, a playroom for the children. But standing in that space, Maria could still remember the smell, the sight of those 3 chained dogs, the absolute horror of that moment. "This is where evil lived," she told the camera. "But look at it now. Sometimes the worst places can become something beautiful again, just like Pip, just like Max and Bella. They were in the darkest place, but they found light again." The documentary, titled Behind Closed Doors, The Dogs 3, aired on national television and won awards. More importantly, it sparked conversations about animal welfare, about the responsibility to speak up, about the hidden abuse in affluent communities. Several similar cases were reported in the weeks following the broadcast. Animals rescued because someone finally opened a locked door. Maria became, somewhat reluctantly, a minor celebrity in animal welfare circles. She spoke at RSPCA events, at schools, at community centers, always with the same message: silence protects abusers, voice protects victims. A year after the rescue, Maria organized a reunion. She contacted Max and Bella's adoptive family, and they agreed to meet at a neutral location, a private dog park in Sydney's inner west. Sarah Mitchell came too, wanting to see her success story in person. When Maria arrived with Pip, her heart was pounding. Would the dogs remember each other? Would seeing her former prisoners trigger Pip's trauma? Max and Bella were already there, and they looked magnificent. Healthy weight, shining coats, alert and happy. When they saw Pip, something extraordinary happened. All three dogs froze, staring at each other. Then simultaneously, their tails started wagging. They approached each other cautiously, sniffing, circling. Then Pip did something she'd never done before. She play-bowed, inviting them to chase her. And they did, all three dogs running together, playing like puppies despite their traumatic shared past. They remember, Sarah said quietly, but they're not remembering the trauma. They're remembering that they survived it together. Maria watched the three dogs play, watched them live fully in this moment of joy, and understood something profound. The locked room hadn't defined them. The chains hadn't broken them. They'd carried their scars, yes, but they'd also carried their strength, their resilience, their fundamental dogness that even cruelty couldn't destroy. You know what the saddest part is?" Maria said to Sarah. "It's thinking about all the other locked rooms, all the other animals suffering right now, waiting for someone to open the door, someone who might be too scared, too busy, too worried about consequences. But you opened the door, and now others will too, because you showed them how." That evening, back in her small Maroubra apartment, Maria sat on the couch with Carlos on one side, Bruno on the other, and Pip curled in her lap. She thought about that Friday afternoon a year ago, standing outside that locked door with the key in her hand, knowing that opening it would change everything. She'd lost a job that day, gained enemies, faced threats and intimidation, but she'd also saved 3 lives, inspired countless others, found purpose in her later years, learned that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. Pip looked up at her with those brown eyes that had once been so hollow and hopeless, now bright with trust and contentment. Maria stroked her soft ears. "You saved me too, you know. I was sleepwalking through life, trying to be invisible. You taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to be silent." Carlos reached over and took Maria's hand, squeezing it gently. He'd recovered well from his stroke, inspired by Maria's courage to work harder at his physical therapy. They'd both been given second chances, him at health, her at purpose. "I'm proud of you," he said in Portuguese. "Always have been, but especially now." On the coffee table sat a letter that had arrived that morning. It was from a woman in Melbourne who'd seen the documentary. She'd opened a locked room in her neighbour's house after hearing strange sounds, found 2 cats, starved and neglected, called authorities. The neighbour was now facing charges. "You gave me courage," the letter read. "You showed me that one person can make a difference. Thank you." Maria had received dozens of similar letters. Each one reminded her that the ripples from that single act of courage spread far beyond 3 dogs, beyond one cruel man's conviction. The real story wasn't that a cleaning lady had opened a locked room. The real story was that she'd refused to close it again, refused to pretend she hadn't seen what she'd seen, refused to value her comfort over their suffering, and in doing so, she'd shown others they could do the same. Pip sighed contentedly in Maria's lap, safe and loved, a world away from that dark room and those heavy chains. But she carried the memory of it, and so did Maria, not as a burden, but as a reminder of what they'd survived, what they'd overcome, and what was possible when someone chose compassion over convenience, voice over silence, action over fear. That's what made Maria cry when she first opened that locked room. Not just the horror of what she saw, but the realization of what it represented. Countless animals suffering in silence, waiting for someone to care enough to look, to see, to act. She'd been that someone. And because she had, 3 dogs lived. And because those 3 dogs lived, others would be saved. Doors would be opened. Voices would be raised, chains would be broken, 1 locked room, 3 dogs, 1 cleaning lady, and a choice that changed everything.